Good morning, everybody. There's a small chance that you saw my most recent video about Cleric, about Necromancer Cleric, and the powers of undead energy taking down foes, instant killing people, and honestly just being an absolutely good time. Now, one thing that's really important is that undead fear the sun, the light coming into their tombs, tearing them to shreds. It's just not a good time for the undead. And it's also important to point out that not only did necromancy spells get boosted for Cleric, but also the evocation and light spells got boosted as well. So I figured it was only fair that if I tested the negative energy and necromancy version of Cleric, why don't I test out the sun version of Cleric, bringing holy light down upon every single enemy in my path. Now this is only going to be one video because it turns out this character leveled extremely quickly, in 3 days to be exact, and there were a lot of reasons for my fast leveling. The first reason is that I didn't really have to pick and choose my quests. Since I was dealing light damage, there's basically no monsters in the entire game that are at all resistant or immune to light damage. Sure, certain constructs take half damage, like golems, but pretty much everything was taking full damage, which made it really easy for the leveling process. On top of that, you've also got a lot of really good and interesting area of effect attacks. Prior to this patch, I'm going to be honest, I pretty much never ever used the spell Flame Strike. It's always done very mediocre damage, especially given the fact that this character would need to run Force Spell Power for the untyped half of the damage, and also Fire Spell Power. However, actually attempting to use a spell-like ability with the changed numbers had shown that the damage is pretty good. It's not as good as some of the effects that you get from the Necromancer Cleric, like just casting a big inflict spell on someone, but it's good enough. And the targeting is not too bad once you get used to leading a target. You see, Flame Strike is the kind of spell where you cast it somewhere, and then you look around, and you wait, and you wait, and you get a sandwich, and you go and you get a cup of coffee, you call a friend, and then after a little while, the spell finally decides to come down and deal some damage to your enemies. This might not be an ideal situation for some, but it does make for some interesting opportunities in gameplay, especially when it comes to leading your foes. Planning where you want to place your flame strikes is an interesting challenge, and while I don't know if the challenge should exist or if that's good for the game in general, I did find it fun while playing my character, and having access to good area of effect attacks, Holy Smite, and Flame Strike pretty much on command made this character level really quickly. To top it off, since I was actually part of the Sun domain, I decided, hey, why don't I actually put some points in a Radiant Servant? And I decided to take this character, pump in some charisma, and turn some undead. It made the leveling experience incredibly quick. Now, it's important to note that I only used this through levels 1 and 2 and 3. After I finished the Catacombs, I did not put any more points in the Radiant Servant tree, and instead just used my area of effect attacks, because I avoided undead-specific quests until I had access to the spell Divine Smite, or Holy Smite, sorry. And the Holy Smite spell just did absolute work on the undead. Anything that happened to make a save or just not die in one hit got deleted by Searing Light, or Sunbeam, or Sunbolt, or Sun anything. All the light spells just tear undead to bits. Now this character leveling quick was really nice because, as I said, I didn't have to pick and choose quests, but this does not mean that Light Cleric was absolutely better than its counterpart. For starters, my ability to turn undead was helped by my high charisma. I started with an 18 charisma and an 18 wisdom, and on a first life character that's quite difficult. But while I was making this character, somebody in my Twitch chat gave me a genius idea. Well, if I need wisdom and I need charisma, obviously I need to spend my points there. And so I can't spend my points in Constitution like I normally would have wanted. And so my Drow Cleric had a 6 Constitution starting out, because who needs health if all the enemy monsters end up being dead? I have to thank my Twitch chat for giving me the sagely advice, and it's important to note that if you would like to give me sagely advice during my play sessions, please join me at twitch.tv/Strimtom, as it's a rootin' tootin' good time, and we come up with genius decisions like this. My character ended up having just around 300 hit points at level 20, and that was with health gear, so I definitely needed to be a little crafty to get myself through a lot of different situations. The low health never really seemed to be a problem though. This character didn't really have too much of an issue of just keeping every single monster off of it. Sunbolt, Searing Light, Sunbeam. These spells have great range, allowing you to keep a good distance from monsters and be able to take them down. In fact, during the early leveling, Reaper mode was a cinch, and I played pretty much every quest on Reaper 1 or Reaper 2, acquiring the highest amount of Reaper points I'd acquired on any character this far. Pretty much every quest from level 10 to level 20 was done on Reaper 2 or higher, and it was a really interesting experience to see what I could do to push the character. Now with that being said, let's talk about the things that are different between the Necromancer Cleric and the Sun Domain Cleric. The first big one is instant kills. Now, as a Sun Domain Cleric, you get access to Implosion and Destruction. However, your Destruction DC, especially as a first life character, is not going to be as good as you want it. I was just using the equipment that I picked up, and it was very, very difficult to actually find necromancy gear. And I didn't have any necromancy focus, which made it difficult for me to actually land the destruction spell. As a result, I pretty much never used it. I did get implosion, and implosion is an awesome instant kill effect for evocation, but it only works once every minute, and you can't direct it. So in a vacuum, implosion is pretty much a better spell, and I would say for general gameplay, implosion is going to end up being a better spell, but its long cooldown and the fact that you can't choose your targeting means that if there's a monster you really gotta kill, you can't kill him. Unless you get really lucky with your implosion, but if you're like me, implosion is going to target the Reapers and other monsters with death block, so you do nothing with that implosion every time you cast it. The second big difference is spell targeting. Flame Strike and Firestorm, two of your biggest spells, have a long delay on their actual cast. The only instant cast spell that you can cast at range is Holy Smite. Outside of Holy Smite, you're casting Sunbeam and Searing Light. Now, Sunbeam and Searing Light are very high damage spells, and they will hurt your enemies. However, they're line spells, so if a monster happens to have a bunch of other monsters in between you and them, your spells will just hit the monsters and not actually hit the one you want. Whereas if you were playing as a necromancer cleric, you could just cast and inflict mass at range and deal your highest damage spell while also dealing damage to the monster. This means that there will be some situations where you just can't do damage to the monster you want. A Reaper in the backline that's pinging you with spells, a champion elemental that's getting ready to cast that fireball, and there's nothing you can do but just watch because the mephits that are in front of you are just absorbing all your shots. It does get complicated and it does get messy. It requires a different style of play and probably a lot more kiting than the other version, so it's hard to say which one is better or worse, but honestly I did find that the AoE clear of the necromancer, as well as the ability to target allies and deal direct damage to them, was a better quality of that one. Third was the actual damage. So the Sun Cleric leveled really quickly. You get great AoE low levels, and you can do whatever quests you want, which meant I could do the fast leveling quests, Catacombs, Ravenloft, all that good stuff. But right around level 14, 15, 16, I started to notice that my damage was not as good as Necromancy Cleric. Getting 2 copies of Necrotic Ray as a Necromancer Cleric and Mass Inflict Wounds critical is really crazy for your single target damage. The Necromancer Cleric was pretty much able to instantly pop Reapers the entire time while leveling, even playing on Reaper 2 and Reaper 3. The Sun Domain Cleric, not quite the same. It was very often 3 or 4 spells, sometimes even 5 spells just to knock down one Reaper, because you just don't deal the same amount of damage. Sunbeam is a nice spell, but it's about 60% of the damage of a Necrotic Ray. And Necrotic Ray also has the fun negative level component, which takes off a big chunk of health before taking off the actual damage. As a result, you will find a lot of situations in which Negative Energy Cleric does more direct damage to monsters, especially in the single target variety. Heck, even some areas where the AoE was good, you would find that Necromancer AoE just ended up being better from the variety of spells you could cast incredibly quickly. So what conclusion can we really draw from this? Well, first of all, I think the biggest conclusion is that Cleric feels like a success. Regardless of which domain you pick, I think you're going to enjoy playing Cleric, whether it's Sun or Necromancer. I also think that depending on your playstyle, you can find a Cleric that really fits you. Melee Cleric is something that's already been tried and true and works reasonably well. If you need a reference, of course, you can always check out Axel's DDO Cleric build that he's got, the 2-handed fighter Cleric, and he runs Reapers and other things with that. And a few friends of mine in my guild also happen to run some Melee Cleric builds. But Caster Cleric needed a buff, and after testing both kinds of Caster Cleric, I can conclusively say a buff was achieved. And whether you want to go the more instant kill Necromancy route, which has some limitations on who it can hit, but gives you way more damage in the single target variety, or the Sun Domain Cleric, which is much more versatile, or possibly even picking up one of the other elemental domains, I think no matter what, you're going to be happy with Cleric of any variety. It's a class with a lot of different playstyles and a lot of different themes. And while I know that this class is in no capacity overpowered, and I do not think that this will be oppressive in the endgame or during the leveling process, I think the Cleric will make a very strong contender as an easy leveler for things in the future like Hardcore League, and will make you feel a lot better at soloing, especially if you decided to pick up a healer type Cleric. Many of the spells, like Searing Light, just happen to have no saving throw on them. So even when there's situations where maybe your stats aren't quite high enough and maybe you're not feeling too comfortable about soloing, you always have a spell that you can throw out that will just guarantee give you damage, and whether you're playing as a Necromancer Cleric or a Sun Domain Cleric, it's just a good spell either way. Now I'm sure you must be eager to get your own hands on a Sun Domain Cleric, so I'm going to pass it over to me to show you exactly how to build the Cleric that I made. Except, you know, I'm going to recommend that you don't take a 6 con, because 6 Constitution to start is a bad idea, and you shouldn't do that, and I'm probably going to have to make a 6 Constitution Cleric now for hardcore. Oh well. A Master of Blasting, a Destroyer of Undead, and a Purger with Holy Light. Light Cleric might be for you, and if it is, you're going to see exactly how to build it right here. Here is my delightful character on the wrong screen, Solar Coaster Lightbright.
I made sure every single enemy I encountered took a ride on the solar coaster and absolutely got demolished by my light spells. Character leveled quickly, efficiently, and was pretty fun to play. So I'll explain to you kind of what some of the breakdown is and how it's different than the previous cleric that I played, the necromancer cleric. To get started, this character has a wisdom of 42 right now, because I started with a base of 18. Every time I leveled up and got an extra wisdom point, I put it in here because that's the most important stat. However, you'll also notice that I have a charisma of 20. That's because I started with an 18 charisma. You don't need to start with this much charisma, but I decided to do it because I wanted to be able to turn undead, and I will say it was very successful. Actually putting points in the Radiant Servant tree at certain points, which is what I did to be able to turn monsters and turn undead, was pretty handy, and making sure I equipped a turning item and was also casting the Seek Eternal Rest spell. It made it so I could turn stuff. However, you shouldn't follow this build exactly one-to-one, and I think it might be a good idea to check out the written component that will come along with this. And the reason is, I kind of started with a 6 Constitution. I wanted to have lots of points put in other places, and somebody in my chat said, hey, 6 Constitution. And I was playing as a Drow Elf, as voted by the Twitch chat, so I said, hey, you know what? Why not? We're playing as a Drow Elf, let's go 6 Constitution and see how bad it is. So I am level 20 with 319 hit points, which is not a lot, trust me. But it was surprisingly not that big of a deal. My character has really good saving throws regardless, especially buffed up in Quest. I get the Fortitude and the Will Save over 40, self-buffed, and Reflex Save into the 30s. So even though this character doesn't feel like it should have that high defensive stats, it's not too bad. Physical and magical resistance rating, again, not being too bad for a character like this because I get to wear a shield. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting. You'll find the stats will be very similar to the Necromancer Cleric, but as I said, starting with a little bit more Charisma is important, but you probably should start with more than 6 Constitution. As far as skills go, because I'm a Drow, I get an extra skill from my Intelligence just being a 10, so I've got 2. So I took Heal and Spellcraft to power up my 2 abilities, healing myself and damaging others. As far as the feats go, the feats are very straightforward. I took some metamagic feats, specifically Maximize, Quicken, and Empower were my first 3 feats. You get a lot of spell-like abilities as a cleric, thanks to the Divine Disciple tree, and also from your domain. So since I had all these additional spell-like abilities, I figured, hey, why don't I just take all of the metamagic feats? Then, once I had these 3 metamagic feats, that's when I decided to later on go into some of the spellcasting feats, pick up Spell Focus, pick up Greater Spell Focus, grab Mental Toughness. I also took Heighten here as well. However, it's important to note, specifically what matters is the domain, and that is the Domain of the Sun. The Domain of the Sun has a couple cool abilities. Number 1, you get free fire and light spell power, which is nice. But also, it makes it so that when you cast Turn Undead, it gives you True Seeing, which is kind of interesting. It lets you detect doors and quests if you don't have True Seeing, which is nice. It also makes incorporeal enemies become corporeal for the duration. This applies to all turning effects, which means if you happen to use Positive Energy Burst, for example, to heal yourself, or if you decided to use Divine Vitality to give somebody else spell points, this also procs this effect, which means you can use a heal somebody who is dying, and make a Reaper corporeal so that people can hit them. And then on top of that, this makes monsters take 10% more damage from light. If you actually are playing the style of Cleric, you will want to do this all the time, because making monsters take 10% more damage is probably one of the best damage increases you can actually get in any capacity, and so you want to make sure you're putting that on monsters when you get up to them. So when you get to that boss, hit them with that light extra bonus, because you're going to be very happy that you decided to do that. Then you get these 3 spell-like abilities. Improved Domain of the Sun is here. This is a Searing Light that you get at level 5. Important note that this uses the same cooldown as the Searing Light from the actual tree. So in Divine Disciple, you take Searing Light. Then at 5, you reset your tree and you get rid of the Searing Light spell-like ability, and you use this one because you can't use both. They use the same cooldown. Then at 9, you pick up Sunbeam, which is just Searing Light, but it does way more damage and it blinds people. And then you get the last Domain of the Sun at 14, which is Sunburst. Sunburst is not the best damage spell ever, but it's good enough, and it scales really high, so Sunburst is pretty fun to use. Does a little bit of extra damage, although I didn't find I used it all that much. I used other spells over that, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. As far as the actual spells go, Cleric is really convenient because you get all the heals on the way up. But other than that, you also make sure you're taking the extra spells you get from the different domains. From the Divine Disciple tree. Picking up Sunbolt, adding it to your spell list, and using that. And I actually think that might be it. Also Sunbeam, I use Sunbeam as well. And yeah, the other ones that you get from the Divine Disciple tree, not necessarily too important here. Instead, making sure to pick up the defensive Cleric buffs, Bless for the extra saves versus fear, and +5 to hit chance for all of your allies. Grabbing Prayer for the same thing, except this also gives you bonuses to your skills, which actually does increase your spell damage, but most importantly, it gives you +5 to your saves, which is pretty sweet to have. Getting Magic Circle against evil, so you can't be mentally compelled, so you can be immune to stuff like command and what have you. Then you might think to yourself, since you're a cleric, you have a high will save, but trust me, you're going to roll a 1, and preventing this is the best. Then you also get resist energy. You always take resist energy. Death Ward, Shield of Faith, kind of basic stuff. Freedom of movement. A couple spells that I'm not in love with, and actually I don't think you should probably use. Divine Punishment is one of them. Divine Punishment does the same damage as the Alchemist spell that just came out. There's like the new Vial spells. Those ones are pretty good, but this costs 25. Getting 3 stacks of this, especially if you have any meta magic feats on it, is going to make it way too expensive to even consider using. So I probably would not use Divine Punishment. I only had it on here because 1, there's no other 5th level spells I wanted to take, and 2, I felt it would be good to land on Urk, who is a boss who teleports around in Sharn, and it was actually useful for keeping track of him, so that was nice. Other than that, the only other spell I will say gets an honorable mention is Firestorm. Firestorm actually does do a lot of damage if you have some fire spell power, and as such, the Fire Domain is very cool because it actually gets fire as a spell-like ability. At level 14, it gets the Firestorm spell. With an 8-second cooldown, it's pretty good. I don't know if it says duration 8 seconds. This definitely has no duration. It just lands. Oh, I can't cast the spell because apparently I'm standing here, so that's great. I'm going to go back to kneeling. Oh, I can't type. Well, that's embarrassing. Anyway, so let's take a look at the enhancement tree instead of me being embarrassed. So this is how I built the enhancement tree so far here. Points in Divine Disciple, taking all the light spell power, all the light crit, the efficient quicken because you quicken everything. Even though you have a lot of spell-like abilities, it's just nice to have. Saving 4 points per spell cast is really, really nice since you're already adding this onto every spell, because quickening makes the game way, way, way better. Then I also use the Holy Smite spell-like ability and the Flame Strike. In the early leveling process, I was using the first spell-like ability for Nimbus of Light, but I am not currently using that as I build towards the end game. Grabbing the bonus to the maximum cast level of your spells here, and also you get it from the Transcendence, which is important, so keep that in mind. And then moving over into the Fey Dark Illusionist tree is where I spent the rest of my points for the most part, especially during the leveling process, because I wanted to pick up on Greater Color Spray. So keep that in mind. This is a very good ability. Now, you might be watching this video and not own the Fey Dark Illusionist. You might not own Feywild, and you can't actually just decide to take Fey Dark Illusionist. If you don't have this ability, it's actually fine. Basically, the way you would kind of spread it out is you'd want to take this arrangement in War Priest, although if I had 1 more point, I would take Sanctuary, grabbing Smite Foe, Resilience of Battle, and Sanctuary for the extra fire and light spell power, extra health, physical resistance rating, the wisdom, and then stopping there at 13 points. You don't really need to go farther in than 13 points because the rest of the stuff is very heavy melee damage. Not as fun. And then you would spend the rest of your points in Radiant Servant, going all the way up, grabbing Improved Empower Healing, which you don't really need. You could probably even just skip this, but get the Wisdom, picking up all the turning stuff so you can turn undead really, really well, and then grabbing the Positive Energy Burst, and then anything else you saw fit. You could even grab the extra bonus cash level with Cures, which would be nice for some of your Mass Cures if you decide to use Mass Cure Critical Wounds, or alternatively grabbing Divine Healing, because this is actually not too bad of an ability if you have nowhere else to spend your points in this tree. It's really bad if you're trying to like play as a regular cleric and you got to take, you know, this ability which costs a whole bunch and this ability which costs a whole bunch. You don't want to spend too many points in the tree. But since you're only going up to around 20-ish with all your leftover points, like 24 that I spent here would be spent here, it's very easy to pick up Divine Healing, and this is nice for both yourself and your allies, being able to heal them for 4d4 hit points every 2 seconds. It's just a good heal over time, especially for leveling. Granted, this is useless for epics, but this is really good for the heroic leveling, which is pretty cool. And that's pretty much all I have to say about this character. It was really fun in terms of the actual building. The gearing was pretty simple and straightforward. I just tried to pick up any items that happen to have like Radiance and Healing lore on them and put them on my character, whatever I could get that I had Wisdom. This was a very lucky item pull this time when I ran through the game. I didn't have to avoid Ravenloft. I didn't avoid Sharn, so I managed to get a bunch of items out of both of those. I also did White Plume Mountain and picked up a Celestial Beacon, which was really nice, grabbing Radiance, Radiance Lore, and Hallowed. This is a fantastic item to pick up if you're planning on playing this type of character, because the Hallowed is nice since it stacks with your Seek Eternal Rest, which is a sacred bonus for turning, making your turns way stronger. And then also, the Radiance and Radiance Lore, you can't complain about that. I had the War Sword Shield, which has Sheltering and Insightful Sheltering on it, and it's also a shield, so it just makes my character much more defensive. And then outside of that, the Scarlet Scale Cloak here was just a really convenient pickup because it gives Insightful Evocation Focus, which you can get off of like a goggle, Insightful Evocation Focus, because I think it's of Evocation is the suffix. But here it was just nice to have that on the cloak. So instead, I got this other lucky pull, an Illusion set of goggles that's Illusion and Insightful Illusion Focus for my color spray. So that way I could color spray people from all the way across the map. But other than that, character's pretty straightforward. I leveled through mostly Reaper mode. The first few levels up to I think a level 5 I was on Elite, but then when we started doing level 6, I started smashing pretty much everything else on Reaper mode, and starting at level 10 I did everything on Reaper 2, because hey, why not, including Sharn. So this character actually ended up with a staggering 41,000 Reaper XP going through on the first life, and it felt really great. Now, I wanted to make that big comparison. How does this feel? A lot of people are going to be wondering, how does it feel versus the Death Cleric versus the Light Cleric? And the answer to that question is that they feel kind of similar. They both have beam spells for attacking monsters. They both have AoEs that have weird targeting limitations, such as Flame Strike, requiring you to kind of like lead a target because it takes time for the thing to actually come down from the heavens. Same thing with Firestorm. You got to lead the targets a little bit, so it's not just going to land. However, the Death Cleric, on the other hand, has the same problem where you have to have hard targeting. You can't just like ground target an area and hit 2 targets that are here and maybe put the spell in the middle so it hits the targets. Instead, it all has to be hard targeted. You have to select someone to cast your Inflict Mass on, which kind of makes it a little bit more complicated. Plus, you have the melee range of the negative energy burst. It makes it a little bit weird in terms of the AoE. What I will say is that this character has lower single target damage than the negative energy cleric, whereas the negative energy cleric has a ton of single target damage with Necrotic Ray, both spell and spell-like ability, carrying a ton of weight, just pulling you out like all the way up the DPS tree, DPS chart, making people really be impressed by your damage because you can just 2-shot Reapers with 2 of those. This character did not have that level of damage. Sunbeam is nice, and when it increases in cast level, it's even better. But unlike playing as a Favored Soul who doesn't get Sunbeam, Favored Souls have huge amounts of extra cash levels and maximum cash levels, and your Cleric does not get that. You get +2 maximum cash levels. As a result, if you want to carry this character all the way into Epics, I mentioned in my Cleric video and guide that I wanted to play that one for the Necromancer in Magister, because you don't really need the extra maximum caster levels. You can use them for the damage if you want to go into Exalted Angel to pick up for a little bit of the extra damage, but I think that the extra DCs and other things you could pick up from the Exalted Angel tree, specifically on a first life character, or not Exalted Angel, from Magister, on a first life character, getting the extra Fortitude save penetration on some of your spells is really, really essential, but they're both pretty good. On this character, oddly enough, you don't want the Exalted Angel tree at all, because your spells all cap out at like 10 or 15 cast levels. Some of them even cap out at 20. So you don't need the extra cast levels from actually being an Exalted Angel. So instead, Draconic Incarnation all the way, baby. Get Draconic Incarnation, grab the Fire Energy Burst, the Fire Dragon Breath, go all in on Evocation, get the critical multiplier, and start spamming spells at people. You want to go Fire and Light with this character? There's that new Staff of the Summer Solstice, which is pretty cool, from the new raid, the Dryad and the Demigod. And that staff also gives more crit multi with some of your Fire and Light spells, so it makes a cool combination. Is this going to be better than Favored Soul? No, Favored Soul does way better in that tree because they also cast off of Charisma, which is hilarious, so their DCs would be higher. But you know what? Light Cleric, it's a little bit behind Favored Soul in terms of damage, but it has that cool turning ability, and the heals feel really good. So overall, I think it's a fun character play and something you should check out. Now, if you wanted to see how I leveled this character, and you want to, they're like, man, this is so cool. I'd love to see kind of how it was in the moment, you know, what quests did you struggle on? What other things? I want to get more information like that. Make sure you go to twitch.tv/Strimtom, where you can see me leveling up these characters before I post the builds. That way I know what works, what doesn't, how to build them out, and you can get that information for yourself. That is twitch.tv/Strimtom, twitch.tv/Strimtom. Head there, link in the description if you want to check it out. We stream Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We do not stream on Sundays, no Sundays. Thank you for watching. If you have any other questions, please leave a comment or do a thing, and I'm going to fall into the ice and freeze for 50 years. Thank you.